I stared at the words on my laptop screen, each one a tiny digital dagger. They seemed to float, suspended in the harsh fluorescent glare of the communications tent, the world around me dissolving into an indistinct hum. The constant thrum of the generators that powered our lives, the distant crackling voice of a soldier on the radio, the ever-present smell of Afghan dust and diesel fuel that clung to everything, it all faded into a dull, meaningless background. My entire universe, my past, my supposed future, had just collapsed into the 17 words typed by the man I called my husband. My name is Captain Lauren Bishop. I'm 35 years old, an officer and a physician's assistant in the United States Army. I was 6 months deep into my third combat deployment, stationed at Forward Operating Base Lightning, a gritty, sun-baked outpost carved into a hostile landscape where the temperature regularly soared past 110 degrees. Here, life was stripped down to its bare essentials: survival, duty, and the unwavering bond with the soldiers to your left and right. My world was one of early morning patrols under a merciless sun, the grit of sand between my teeth, and the sudden heart-stopping thump of a distant IED explosion that served as a constant reminder of our mortality. In that landscape of sand and stone, thousands of miles from the concept of comfort, the only soft place in my world, the only anchor to the life I planned to return to, was the thought of my husband, Eric. I remembered our last conversation, a hurried video call just before I shipped out. He had held the phone up, showing me the garden he'd promised to tend, his charming smile filling the screen. "Don't you worry about a thing, babe," he'd said, his voice earnest. "You just focus on staying safe and coming home. I'll hold down the fort. I'll handle everything." He was my anchor, the steady point on the map to which I would always return. My trust in him was absolute, so absolute that years ago I had given him power of attorney, enabling him to manage our finances and our life while I was away serving our country. It seemed like the practical, loving thing to do. Now that trust lay in ruins. The betrayal did not arrive with the roar of an explosion, but with the quiet, digital chime of an incoming email. I had been catching up on administrative work, a rare moment of quiet in the controlled chaos of the base. I saw his name in my inbox and felt a familiar flutter of warmth, expecting photos of our dog or a simple, "I love you." Instead, the subject line was a single brutal word: divorce. I clicked it open, a knot of confusion tightening in my chest. The email was short, cold, and devastatingly efficient. He informed me that our marriage was over. He had moved on. He had already filed the paperwork. He wished me well. The clinical, detached words felt more violent than a physical blow, meticulously crafted to inflict maximum damage from a safe distance. He couldn't even grant me the dignity of a phone call, where I might have heard a flicker of hesitation or shame in his voice. Just a cold, cowardly, calculated message, lobbed like a grenade into the center of my life. With a trembling hand, I used the trackpad to scroll down, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach like a cold serpent. The attachments came into view. First, the divorce papers, a sterile PDF filled with legal jargon that felt alien and obscene in this place of raw human struggle. Then, the bank statements, page after page showing withdrawals, transfers, a systematic draining of our joint savings account until almost nothing was left. $38,000. Money I had earned under the most strenuous conditions imaginable, money we had earmarked for our future, for a family, for the life I thought we were building together, had vanished in a series of cold, digital transactions. And then came the final, most personal violation, the photos. A young woman, a blonde I had never seen before, was lounging in my living room. My living room. Her feet, clad in fluffy pink slippers, were propped up carelessly on the solid oak coffee table I had found at an antique shop and saved for months to buy. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol of the home I longed for, a piece of permanence in my transient life. In one photo, she was smiling at the camera, a triumphant, self-satisfied smirk on her face, holding a glass of wine. In another, she was wearing my jewelry, a delicate gold necklace Eric had given me for our 5th anniversary, a piece I cherished and had left behind for safekeeping. The injustice of it was a searing, physical pain in my chest, a fire that threatened to consume me. For the last 6 months, my reality had been a concrete bunker that shook when distant mortars landed. My bed was a narrow cot. I ate tasteless meals ready to eat out of a brown plastic pouch. I spent my days patching up young soldiers, treating everything from dehydration to catastrophic blast injuries, the scent of antiseptic unable to mask the smell of fear and blood. And while I lived that life, my husband, Eric, had been living it up. He was playing house with his new girlfriend, funded by my labor and my sacrifice, in the very home my career had paid for. Every single dollar in that account was stained with my sweat and dedication. It represented grueling 24-hour shifts at the base hospital back in the States. It represented specialized training courses that took me away from home for months at a time, pushing my mind and body to their absolute limits. It was the steady accumulation of my military pay, a salary I had carefully managed and saved while Eric, my charming, ambitious Eric, bounced from one part-time job to another, always full of grand schemes for businesses that never seemed to get off the ground. The woman in the photos, the one who had so casually usurped my life, looked young enough to be my little sister. A quick glance at the email signature identified her. Brittany Hart, future Mrs. Bishop. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it took my breath away. She was wearing my jewelry, sitting on my furniture, drinking from my coffee mugs, and I had no doubt sleeping in my bed, under the quilt my grandmother had made for me as a wedding gift. But as I sat there on a rickety metal chair, forcing myself to take slow, steady breaths, something inside me began to shift. The initial, overwhelming wave of shock and grief began to recede. It was replaced by something colder, something harder, something far more familiar to me than heartbreak. It was the steely resolve of a soldier under fire. The military doesn't just train you to fight. It trains you to think. It trains you to compartmentalize emotion, to analyze a threat, to identify weaknesses, and to formulate a devastatingly effective counterattack. Eric had always underestimated me. He saw the loving wife who cooked his dinner, did his laundry, and supported his endless stream of half-baked dreams. He had conveniently forgotten about the other Lauren, the one who had not only survived but thrived through 3 combat tours, the one who had earned a Bronze Star for valor by running into danger when every instinct screamed to run away. He had made a critical, life-altering error in judgment. And as the white-hot rage cooled into an icy, focused determination, I knew with absolute certainty that he was about to discover exactly who he had married. I snapped the laptop shut, the click echoing in the sudden silence of my mind. I stood up, my movements stiff, and walked outside. The Afghan night was vast and profound. The stars, unobscured by city lights, glittered like a canopy of scattered diamonds. In that moment of clarity, under that ancient sky, I made a silent vow. This was not the end. This was the beginning of a war he had started, and one I intended to finish. The next morning, the familiar grinding routine of deployment life began anew, but the world felt irrevocably altered. The world had sharpened into a higher definition of betrayal. As I went through my duties at the base medical facility, suturing wounds, setting bones, offering words of comfort to homesick young soldiers, my mind was a closed loop, replaying Eric's betrayal. My focus, usually so absolute, was fractured. The other soldiers in my unit, men and women I considered family, noticed the change immediately. "You okay, Captain?" Staff Sergeant Martinez, a good-natured father of 3 from Texas, asked as we prepped medical kits for a morning patrol. His dark eyes were filled with genuine concern. "You seem off today. A million miles away." I managed a thin smile, a brittle gesture that felt foreign on my face. "Just tired, Martinez. Long night." But it wasn't fatigue. It was the terrible, sharp clarity that comes when the person you trusted most in the world reveals themselves to be a complete stranger, an enemy hiding in plain sight. Eric and I had been married for 8 years, a couple for a decade. I met him when I was a brand new lieutenant, fresh out of officer candidate school, full of spit, polish, and ideals. He was a bartender at a popular sports bar near Fort Campbell, and he'd swept me off my feet with his easy charm and quick wit. He seemed not only to understand the demands of military life but to admire me for it. Or so I had believed. Looking back now, with the painful gift of hindsight, the warning signs were scattered across the years like red flags on a battlefield. It wasn't just one thing, but a pattern of behavior I had willfully ignored. There were the constant excuses for late bills, the mysterious credit card charges he'd brush off as bank errors. I remembered the time a car he'd bought, a flashy sports car we couldn't afford, was repossessed in the middle of the night. He'd told me he sold it to a friend to help with a down payment on a business venture. It was a lie, one of many I had chosen to believe because the alternative was too painful. There was the slow, resentful shift from a proud, supportive spouse to a man who clearly begrudged my career, my rank, my deployments, and the financial independence that came with it. During my first deployment to Iraq, he had played the role of the perfect military husband to perfection. He sent care packages and daily emails. By the second, the communications had dwindled, becoming sporadic and often filled with thinly veiled complaints about how difficult his life was. This time, there had been almost total silence, which I had foolishly attributed to him being busy and self-sufficient. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there. The subtle but persistent way he had pushed me to add his name to all our accounts before this deployment, framing it as a practical way to make managing our finances easier. The way he had insisted on handling all the household bills because my military schedule was too unpredictable. The way he had slowly, methodically isolated me from my friends and family, always with a reasonable-sounding excuse. But what Eric didn't know, what he had never taken the time to learn about the woman he married, was that a soldier doesn't survive 3 deployments without learning to plan for every contingency. We don't give our trust blindly. We prepare. And years ago, I had taken measures that Eric was about to discover in the most public and painful way imaginable. The memory was vivid. I was in a sterile beige office at the base legal center 3 years ago, before my second deployment. Across the desk sat JAG Attorney Major Patricia Holmes, a woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I had gone to her for advice on creating a will, but the conversation had shifted. She had seen too many good soldiers ruined by drama back home. "Captain Bishop," she had said, her voice devoid of sentimentality, "the most dangerous battlefield for a deployed soldier is often their own bank account. The stress of deployment fractures marriages. And when they break, the spouse at home holds all the cards. They control the mail, the finances, the narrative. You have to protect yourself." She told me a short, brutal story about a sergeant whose wife sold their house and disappeared with their children while he was in Kandahar, leaving him with nothing but a mountain of debt. Her words had chilled me to the bone. On her advice, I established a military spouse financial protection trust. It was a brilliant, ironclad legal instrument that completely separated my military pay and my most significant personal assets from the joint accounts Eric and I shared. The money Eric had so gleefully stolen, the $38,000 he thought was our entire net worth, was actually just the surface layer. It was an accessible fund I had deliberately maintained to preserve the illusion of a normal, shared financial life. My real wealth, including the deed to the house, which was solely in my name within the trust, and the bulk of my life savings, was shielded by specific military regulations. Regulations that carried federal criminal penalties for unauthorized access. Eric hadn't just committed adultery. He had committed a federal crime. As I finished my medical rounds that day, checking on young men and women who trusted me with their very lives, I thought about that trust. I had extended that same unwavering trust to Eric, and he had turned it into a weapon against me. But betrayal is a debt that always gets repaid. Eric was about to learn that the quiet, accommodating wife he thought he knew had been preparing for this very possibility all along. I waited until after evening chow, when the mess tent had mostly emptied out, leaving just a few soldiers playing a quiet game of cards and the ever-present sound of helicopters ferrying troops and supplies. I found a secluded corner, opened my laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor in the reply field. My first instinct was to unleash a torrent of rage and pain. Then I considered pleading, asking him why. But years of military training, of leadership under fire, had taught me that when you are attacked, you do not react with emotion. You assess, you gather intelligence, and you respond with overwhelming and decisive force. An emotional reply would give him satisfaction. A pleading one would give him power. Silence was an option, but not the best one. I needed to sow a seed of doubt. I needed to make him wonder, just for a moment, if he had miscalculated. Type 5 words. Are you sure about that? Then, with a steady hand, I hit send. The beauty of the message was its calculated simplicity. Eric would read it and be momentarily confused. He would likely dismiss it as the impotent rage of a woman he had already defeated. He would go back to his new life with Brittany, confident that he had outmaneuvered me completely. And for the next few days, he would be right to feel that confidence. But confidence built on a foundation of ignorance is a dangerous thing, and his knowledge of our true financial situation was fatally, laughably flawed. I opened a new, encrypted email and began typing, not to my husband, but to Major Holmes. It was time to activate the contingency plan I had prayed I would never have to use. Within minutes, I had transmitted the entire package. Eric's email, the bank statements showing the illegal withdrawals, the photos of Brittany in my home, and the governing documents of my trust. I sent a similar package to my civilian attorney, Rebecca Chen, a sharp litigator Major Holmes had recommended years ago. The gears of military and federal justice had begun to turn. Eric had picked a fight with a soldier. He was about to find out that some battles are lost long before the first shot is ever fired. The response came faster than I could have imagined. Major Holmes, true to form, replied within 6 hours. Her message arrived in the dead of the Afghan night, the timestamp showing she had sent it at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, long after most people had gone home. Captain Bishop, she wrote, the text crisp and professional. I have reviewed the materials. We are implementing immediate protective measures under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. I have already forwarded your case to the federal authorities regarding the unauthorized withdrawal of funds from accounts protected under military spouse protection statutes. Additionally, I am coordinating with your civilian attorney to freeze all assets and prevent further financial damage. Stand by for updates. I leaned back in my bunk, a slow, grim smile tugging at the corners of my mouth for the first time in days. Eric had no idea what was about to hit him. The SCRA wasn't just some dusty military rulebook. It was a powerful federal law designed to shield deployed service members from exactly the kind of financial predation Eric had just committed. Violating it carried serious consequences, including hefty fines, mandatory restitution, and, in cases like this, criminal charges. Over the next 48 hours, a steady stream of emails began flowing in from my legal team, a coordinated assault playing out across continents. Rebecca Chen, my civilian attorney, was a bulldog. Lauren, she wrote, we have obtained emergency court orders freezing all accounts that Eric accessed. The bank records show the withdrawals began 3 weeks ago, placing his actions squarely within the time frame covered by your deployment protection orders. We have also confirmed with the county clerk that the house deed remains solely in your name, as per the trust document. He never had the legal authority to claim any ownership. Her next email was even better. Additionally, she wrote, I have been in contact with the local sheriff's department. Your home has been secured, and all unauthorized occupants have been removed. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who has been keeping an eye on the property, reports that Eric and his girlfriend were quite surprised by the law enforcement visit yesterday morning. She said they looked like startled chickens. I could picture it perfectly. Eric, probably still in his pajamas, smugly sipping my coffee, answering the door to find 2 stern-faced deputies holding court orders. The look of arrogant confusion melting into raw panic as they explained that he was illegally occupying a house that didn't belong to him, that the money he'd been spending belonged to a deployed service member, and that his actions constituted multiple federal crimes. The girlfriend, Brittany, had probably been even more shocked. A 22-year-old in the middle of a fairy tale romance, suddenly confronted with the reality that her new man was a common criminal living on stolen funds. I wondered how long it had taken her to pack her bags. But the most satisfying email came directly from Major Holmes, updating me on the criminal investigation. Captain Bishop, it read. The FBI Financial Crimes Division has formally accepted the case, citing the interstate nature of the crimes and the federal military protections involved. Agent Martinez will be the lead investigator. Eric Bishop is being charged with wire fraud, theft from a government employee, and violations of the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act. Each charge carries significant prison time. The agent wanted me to tell you that this is one of the clearest-cut cases of military spouse financial abuse she has ever seen. I closed my laptop and stepped outside into the cool desert air. For the first time since reading Eric's email, I felt a sense of profound calm. He had thought he was so clever. He had timed his betrayal for when he thought I was at my most vulnerable and isolated. He had counted on the distance, the communication delays, the assumption that I was too distracted by combat operations to fight back effectively. He had forgotten that I was a soldier. And soldiers don't just fight battles. We plan for them, we strategize, and we win them. 2 weeks later, an email from Eric arrived that made me laugh out loud in the middle of a tactical briefing. Captain Rodriguez, my commanding officer, shot me a look of concern. Everything okay, Bishop? I held up my phone so he could see the screen. The subject line was, "Please call me, urgent." The message was a masterpiece of panicked, self-pitying delusion. "Lauren," it began, "I think there's been some kind of huge mistake. The police came to the house, and now they're saying I'm under federal investigation. They froze all my accounts. I can't even buy groceries. This is insane. I know you're upset about the divorce, but this has gone way too far. Can't we just work this out like adults? I'm even willing to give you half the money back if you just call off your lawyers. Please call me as soon as you get this. This is ruining my life." The best part was the complete and utter lack of awareness. There was no apology for the affair, no remorse for the theft, just pure, undiluted outrage that his actions had consequences. I forwarded the email to Major Holmes with a single line. "I assume this means the investigation is proceeding smoothly." Her response was immediate and dry. "Agent Martinez reports that Mr. Bishop retained a public defender yesterday. Apparently, no private attorney was willing to take his case, given that all his assets are frozen. The girlfriend, Ms. Hart, disappeared 2 days ago. Her social media suggests she has returned to her parents' home in Florida and is vigorously claiming she had no knowledge of any criminal activity." I almost felt a flicker of pity for Brittany. Almost. She was young and probably naive. But she had also been perfectly happy to live in my house, wear my jewelry, and flaunt her new life online, a life funded by my labor while I was in a war zone. Ignorance might be a legal defense, but it was hardly a moral one. The military grapevine at the FOB, as always, had picked up on my situation. Word had gotten around that Captain Bishop was dealing with a cheating, thieving spouse back home. The response from my fellow soldiers was a quiet, overwhelming wave of support. Someone left a bar of my favorite chocolate on my bunk with a note. "Hang in there, Captain. Your military family has your back." Staff Sergeant Martinez, the one who had first noticed my distress, pulled me aside after the evening briefing. "Captain," he said, his voice low, "I don't know all the details, but I wanted you to know. My wife went through something similar during my first deployment. Her ex cleaned out their accounts and moved in with someone else. It nearly destroyed her." "What happened?" asked, genuinely curious. "Military legal helped her fight," he said. "It took 2 years, but she got everything back and then some. The ex ended up doing 6 years for fraud. Military justice doesn't mess around when it comes to protecting deployed families." He smiled. "She's doing great now. Remarried to a good man who actually deserves her. Sometimes," he concluded, "the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened." As I walked back to my quarters that night, I thought about his words. Eric's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also stripped away the illusions I had been living with for years. It had revealed his true character, and in doing so, it had reminded me of my own. I wasn't the accommodating, excuse-making wife anymore. I was Captain Lauren Bishop, a combat veteran who had earned the respect of her peers through competence and courage. Eric had picked a fight with the wrong woman. The third week brought news that was so staggering it exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. Major Holmes called me personally on a secure satellite line, a rarity usually reserved for the most critical communications. "Captain Bishop," she said, her voice crackling slightly through the connection, "I wanted to give you a personal update. Agent Martinez has uncovered additional evidence that significantly strengthens the case." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, my heart beginning to beat faster. "It appears your husband's financial crimes were far more extensive than we initially thought. The FBI discovered he had been using your military credentials, your flawless credit, your security clearance, your service record, to apply for credit cards and loans. He was forging your signature on documents while you were deployed. The total amount of the fraud now exceeds $100,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. 100,000. Credit cards in your name that you never authorized, all maxed out. A second mortgage on the house that he obtained using forged documents. A high-interest personal loan from a predatory lender that specifically targets military families, using your service record as collateral. Captain, Eric Bishop wasn't just an unfaithful husband who stole your savings. He was running a sophisticated financial fraud operation, and he was using your identity as his primary tool. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. While I had been focused on the $38,000 he had taken from our joint account, he had been systematically destroying my entire financial life, burying me under a mountain of debt he never intended to repay. "The good news," Major Holmes continued, her voice firm and reassuring, "is that all of these crimes fall squarely under federal jurisdiction due to your military status. The evidence is overwhelming. Agent Martinez believes this will be one of the strongest military spouse fraud cases she has ever prosecuted. He is looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison." After the call ended, I sat in stunned silence. The man I had married had not just tried to leave me. He had tried to annihilate me financially. But alongside the shock came a fierce, cold satisfaction. Eric had thought he was being clever, using my deployment as a shield. Instead, my status as a deployed soldier had become the very sword that would bring him down. The details of his arrest, which came 2 days later, were relayed in an email from Rebecca Chen. He had been taken into custody at 6 a.m. at the Nashville bus station, trying to board a Greyhound to Florida. He was planning to join Brittany, who, it turned out, was not interested in a reunion. She had already given a full statement to the FBI. The arresting agents found him carrying a fake ID and nearly $5,000 in cash, money directly traced back to one of the fraudulent loans. "Lauren," Rebecca wrote, "I thought you'd like to know that his arrest made the local news." The headline was, "Local man arrested for defrauding deployed military wife. They mentioned your Bronze Star. The community response has been overwhelmingly supportive of you." I smiled at that. Eric, who had always been so obsessed with his public image, was now a local pariah. Justice, I was learning, comes in many forms. 6 weeks later, I received the email I had been waiting for. It was from Agent Martinez herself. "Case closed," the subject line read. "Captain Bishop," she wrote, "I'm pleased to inform you that Eric Bishop has accepted a plea agreement. He has pleaded guilty to all charges. In exchange for his plea, the prosecution has recommended a sentence of 12 years in a federal prison. He is also ordered to pay full restitution of all stolen and fraudulent funds, including penalties and interest. The total restitution amount is $147,000. As part of the agreement, he forfeits any and all claims to any marital assets and will not contest the divorce." I read the email 3 times, letting each word sink in. 12 years. Complete financial ruin. The man who had tried to destroy me from 7,000 miles away had been utterly and completely defeated, brought down by the very systems designed to protect people like me. Rebecca Chen's follow-up email contained the final, perfect piece of news. "Lauren, because Eric signed the asset forfeiture agreement, you now have clear and unencumbered title to the house. The fraudulent second mortgage has been voided by the court. The predatory loan has been transferred to Eric's personal responsibility. You will return from deployment to a debt-free house, a clean credit record, and full ownership of all marital assets. I closed my laptop and walked outside to watch the sunset paint the Afghan mountains in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Eric's greed and stupidity had cost him everything. The woman he had betrayed was coming home, not to ruin, but to the satisfaction of seeing justice perfectly and publicly served. 3 months later, I stepped off the plane at Nashville International Airport. The humid Tennessee air, so different from the dry desert heat, felt like freedom. My sister Jenna was waiting for me. On the drive to Clarksville, I told her everything. 12 years, she asked, her voice filled with awe. For stealing from a deployed service member, I corrected. Eric learned the hard way. When we pulled into my driveway, I just stared at the house. It looked the same, but it felt entirely different. It wasn't our house anymore. It was mine. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, rushed over. "Lauren, welcome home, honey. That husband of yours sure made a scene when the police came. Are you doing okay, dear?" she asked, her eyes full of sympathy. "This must have been so hard on you." I looked at my house, my sister, and the life that was now mine to build. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in a long time, "I'm doing better than okay. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The revenge I had taken wasn't born of anger or hatred. It was the simple, inevitable result of preparation, discipline, and the quiet truth that actions have consequences. Eric had gambled everything on the assumption that I was a helpless victim. He had forgotten I was a soldier. And as I walked through my front door, a truly free woman, I understood that sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply letting your enemy destroy themselves with their own choices. Do you believe that karma sometimes needs a little help? That preparation and intelligence are the ultimate weapons? Then you belong here with us in Revenge Valley. We are a community that appreciates a well-played game and a satisfying final move. To get your weekly story of brilliant revenge and join the valley, click subscribe and turn on all notifications. You won't regret it.